Marine Sanctuary Foundation, Joel R. Johnson.
Hello. Good afternoon. All right, we are in the final stretch here, and perhaps one of the most exciting parts of the Capitol Hill Ocean Week 2025. So I am excited to introduce to you the next panel. With the rise of next generation technologies, the path to American ocean energy leadership demands interagency strategic planning, responsible development, public input, and safeguards that protect both ecosystems and communities. Investors, utilities, developers, and ocean users need clarity, certainty, and confidence to unlock innovation, attract capital, and balance growth with environmental stewardship. This particular CHOW session brings together leaders in energy, finance, science, and policy to explore how the U.S. can lead in offshore energy, leveraging the best available data and technology to strengthen American competitiveness, while also coexisting with fisheries, shipping, tourism, and other important conservation priorities. So we are going to have a discussion about how we build a durable, inclusive energy future offshore. I am pleased to welcome to the stage Dr. Ruth Perry, Head of Permitting and Development for Shell Power. She is responsible for leading and executing the permitting and regulatory advocacy, policy, and research strategies for Shell's global power portfolio. Prior to this role, she served as a marine scientist at the Regulatory Policy Specialist responsible for offshore marine environmental policy for Shell Exploration and Production Americas. In both of those capacities, Dr. Perry advises and advocates for Shell on energy, maritime and environmental policies, and regulations for resource management, including fisheries, marine life, and benthic resources in the nation's EEZ. In this role, she creates partnerships to responsibly advance ocean energy and power growth, as well as marine resource management and conservation. Dr. Perry has over 15 years of ocean technology research and system implementation and ocean policy experience, and I am pleased to welcome to the stage Dr. Ruth Perry and our guests.
Well, thank you everybody for sticking to the last panel of a great 2 days. We're really excited to build off some of the topics that you heard about today, from fisheries, blue economy, deep sea exploration, and now we're going to go back up a little bit to the surface and talk about a number of different aspects of ocean energy. But when I say energy, I'm not talking about conventional oil and gas or minerals or that. We're actually looking across energy from strength and ingenuity and technology. And that also includes workforce and people. And how do we continue to build American competitiveness while leveraging the best available data and technology, and doing so by promoting and balancing coexistence with fisheries, shipping, tourism, and conservation priorities. So it's my pleasure to moderate this panel of leaders and executives from different private sectors of the blue economy. They have many years of experience that overlap public and private sectors, and they certainly have knowledge in all of those things I just listed. I do want to emphasize today's conversation is really a policy neutral conversation, and what we want to attempt to do today is present a wide variety of private sector expertise and how that overlaps with the public sectors, non-governmental organizations, and really looks at building that competitiveness of the US EEZ. But just to remind everybody, we'll take question and answers, so like the other sessions, please write it on the cards, hold it up, it'll be collected, and we will get to your questions after we hear our opening remarks. All right, so I'm not going to introduce everybody. I'm actually going to ask all of my panelists to introduce themselves by telling the audience their affiliation and background with the blue economy and the importance of your work specifically to supporting a healthy ocean economy. So I will start with Michael.
So I'd like to start by echoing Ruth's appreciation for you all making it to the late slate. I know that some of you will have been deliberating over whether or not to chase your first cocktail, so I appreciate you making the decision to stay with us here, and hopefully in an hour you'll feel like that was the right decision. My name's Michael Braid. I am the Vice President at Edison West Offshore, and I'm also a board member at the Oceanic Network. Edison West Offshore is a privately held organization founded down in Louisiana. It's over 60 years old, and it's owned by the Schwest family. We're best known for designing, building, owning, and operating vessels that support offshore energy, and that straddles traditional hydrocarbon as well as the more modernized offshore wind and various other governmental and military applications that we support. We also have research vessels working in the north and the south. The company is invested in the blue economy. It's more than just a way of earning revenues and keeping employment up. It's something that's very close to our founders' hearts and the legacy of the Schwest family. Origination starting out of fishing and then migrating into how that vessel supported Humboldt Energy, which is now Exxon, all the way back in 1960. Everyone down in the areas in the bayous down Louisiana, they are, Edison Schwest is synonymous with those regions. If you're not working directly, you're working indirectly in that sort of engagement to fishing, offshore energy, and the other services that support a lot of the jobs in the area. So we're really proud to play our small role in the sector, and appreciate being asked to speak on this panel today.
Great. Thanks, Michael. Jake?
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. I'll echo Michael's thanks to you all for sticking it out, and to Ruth for the cat herding she's about to do over the next hour. I'm Jake Kreitzer. I'm the Executive Director of the Northeastern Regional Association of Coastal Ocean Observing Systems, or NERACOOS. We're one of the 11 regional associations that puts into practice the U.S. Integrated Ocean Observing System, or IOOS. IOOS is a pretty broadly based public-private partnership. It's a federal program, but as I said, it's implemented largely outside the federal government through a network of regional associations and an even bigger community of implementation partners. Our mandate is pretty broad in scope. Really, we're there to try to meet coastal and ocean data needs of the nation writ large. That's everyone from the 17 federal agencies that make up US IOOS to state, tribal, municipal agencies, the private sector, researchers, educators, you name it. It's a pretty cool program to be part of. I actually came to IOOS after spending many years in fisheries science and management. I'm trained as a fisheries oceanographer. But one of the things I liked about getting into ocean observing was I still get to keep active in fisheries, which is an area that's pretty near and dear to my heart, but get to work more broadly on what's going on in the ocean economy. And I think a lot of what we'll talk about today, this sort of intersections, interactions, even conflicts, frankly, between different sectors and how we can work to resolve those and promote coexistence.
Great, thank you. Tashara.
Hi, I'm Tashara Matthews. I'm the Senior Vice President with WSP for Offshore Policy. I've been with WSP for 2 years. WSP is an environmental and engineering firm. We have about 20,000 employees here in the U.S. and hundreds of thousands across the world. We focus on infrastructure, ports, bridges, roads, energy, and power delivery. And so I was formerly with the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management in the Gulf region. I was with them for 14 years, and I ran their renewable energy program, the marine minerals program, and alternate use program. And I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. And last but not least, David.
Yeah, hi, everybody. Thank you, Ruth, and it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you to the organizers for the opportunity to be part of this important discussion today. So my name is David Miller. I'm Government Accounts Director for Fugro. Fugro is a geodata specialist that provides mapping, modeling, and monitoring solutions to public and private sector clients across the energy, infrastructure, and water sectors. What that means is essentially we are collecting, analyzing ocean data for the purposes of de-risking investments of our clients in the resource development management or infrastructure development management space. This involves the integration of geodata that could span met ocean, hydrography, geophysics, geotechnics, environmental studies, geochemistry, and geospatial, for examples. And we have been advocating for public-private partnerships in the ocean data space for some time. So it's great to be part of this discussion today on ocean data in the blue economy context.
Great. And I hope just from the introductions you heard that from a workforce perspective, and many of you in the audience who might be younger in your careers, is that in some capacity we've all transitioned, whether that has been different uses, different sectors, and all of those experiences, bringing those to our current positions. And that's some of the conversation we're going to get into today. So I guess what I'm really trying to say is this is also a great panel to meet afterwards and help you to build your network and exposure if you're also interested in seeking opportunities. So I had to put that plug in. So I'm going to start with David and work way back to myself. What are critical elements needed from government and policymakers to realize blue economy policies?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, there are three critical elements needed to realize blue economy policies. Firstly is the recognition of the need for ocean data to properly inform ocean governance, policy, and management. Ocean data is needed to understand where sustainable economic development should occur and where critically sensitive ecosystems and habitats should be protected. In general, there's insufficient ocean mapping and ocean observation data within the US EEZ to properly inform these decisions currently. Seabed mapping, information, and knowledge is fundamental to advancing maritime commerce, domestic seafood production, energy production, tourism and recreation, environmental protection, and national security. Yet only 54% of the US EEZ has been mapped, as an example. It's a similar story on the ocean observation side, where there's yet to be comprehensive ocean observing within US waters, and that is even more exaggerated when you get to depth, ocean observing in depths. So the private sector is mapping and observing the ocean in support of sustainable economic development activities, which create opportunities to expand and accelerate public-private partnerships.
Great, thank you. Tushara?
Yeah, so I'll go back to when I was at the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. I managed the Marine Minerals Program, and it wasn't a change in policy. It just started that we started enforcing more of the policy that was already in place when it came to decommissioning assets that were in the Gulf. Most of the companies were used to leaving the assets in place, but the Marine Minerals Program needed the sediment offshore to do coastal restoration in Louisiana for the Gulf Coast. And so as the policies began to change, companies were put off guard because they were normally able to do their decommissioning plan when they leave in place. And we started asking them to start doing asset removal. And so conversations had to be had, and we needed to better understand the processes that the private sector had. There's a year-long process that they have to go under. They have to think about how much it's going to cost to decommission those assets, and it wasn't in their budget. And so once we were able to understand their process, we were better to able to tweak our process so that we can say, hey, here are the assets that we would need you all to remove. These are the areas that are high priorities for the states to do their coastal restoration. So it's critical that you have regular conversations with private industry, and so that they can best understand what their processes are.
Great, and I'm going to hold the point on the education and evolution of uses that are changing in the blue economy, and we'll come back to that later. Jake?
Yeah, well, I'll echo what Tushara said about public-private partnership. I think that's critical. I might speak to that more later. I think as a first step, though, I see a lot of need and opportunity for greater interagency coordination, particularly on things, just like fundamental data collection. And as I say that, I recognize that most of the federal agencies that have responsibilities in the ocean space are managing hefty and complex portfolios of policies they're responsible for, whether those are statutes or executive orders or other policies, and that's under any administration, and typically with too few resources. So they have big jobs that are a struggle to do sometimes. But I think what that does is it creates silos that limits possibilities for generating data, generating information that can serve the government, really serve society more widely. And as I say this, I'll note there's any number of notable examples where that doesn't happen, where interagency coordination and cooperation does happen. But we need to build on those models and figure out ways that we can build more truly integrated systems where, ultimately our goal should be that every datum generated through public funding has as much reach as possible, serves as many users, whether those are federal agencies or the private sector or elsewhere. And I think public-private partnership is going to be critical to that. But I think the first step is for federal agencies to sort of model that partnership and that exchange.
Great. You brought up a word, silo, and I bet, has any of our audience experienced any of those silos in your daily work, whether it be government partnership or interagency cooperation? And raise hands, or you don't have to raise hands. But I see a lot of heads nodding, right? So just to point out that that's not only unique to the private sector as well, but it's a great point. All right, Michael, you're next.
So I guess from our perspective, in the role that we play in marine transportation and other private sector supply chain servicing, a stable regulatory framework is what we most covet. And this is primarily behind new build projects. So obviously when we're taking any long-term strategic decision-making about large deployment of capital, you need to have a lot of stability in your horizon, otherwise you can start to encounter so much risk and volatility that you won't get underwriting assurance behind it and your decision can't be made. So that needs to be more than just a 4-year horizon. It has to be a longer term basis as it used to be. We need to have streamlined permitting process. I mean, obviously that is in existence today, but if you look at various different sectors, there's now probably a significant imbalance for that. The reason that is a huge problem to the supply chain is, sometimes your decision can happen, and then during the process, something else is changing. And so having such an elongated permitting process can create issues if you're looking to design, build, and deliver a product to the market that could take 3 years in its case, through design and engineering through the shipyard process. I think given also how quickly technological advancements occur in this sector, which is a fantastic positive, we need to have a little bit more malleable legislation. So we don't want to have to keep coming back and rewriting and debating over what needs to change in legislation to allow new technologies to exist and to provide positive impacts to any aspect of the blue economy in general.
Great. And we'll come back to some of those reasons that it's not malleable in the first place later in the conversation. When you say long-term, you mentioned longer than 4 years. So on about, what is that long-term time? Are we talking 8 years, 12 years?
So you would sort of predicate that on your amortization of your capital. And for very large vessels that are 100, 200, 500 million, you need to have a lot longer than 4. So we would be looking traditionally at 12 to 14 years, ideally, at a minimum, and in some cases 20 plus. So the natural working life of offshore vessels before any sort of extension of life through the classification societies, in that 25-year range. So you want to have full amortization, debt recovery, and start paying back investment to the equity piece well before that horizon.
Great. Thank you for that. So let's go a little bit deeper into some of the topics. Jake and Tushar, I'm going to start with you on the first question, and if Michael or David would like to chime in after. You both mentioned that there's been success stories of coexistence or co-use between sectors, or where you've seen effective partnerships. Could you elaborate on an example or two?
Go ahead. So when you start a new frontier, a new use in an ocean basin, you need to think about the other previous uses. And so in the Gulf, we have a lot going on, right? And so we have marine traffic, we have oil and gas, we have marine minerals, there's a lot going on. So when you look at a new use, you need to figure out where the current uses are and what's trending in those areas. And so what we found is utilizing the fisheries data from NOAA and other NGOs was very useful in help planning the new uses in the Gulf. And so it's very key to share data, and especially, I will mention after Deepwater Horizon, everyone was collecting data. So agencies, entities came together and said, we need a repository where all of this data can go, that everyone can utilize that. And so we utilized that for the Gulf of America Alliance, was one of the big agencies that everybody was putting all this data into. And so we were able to see where the data was being collected, what was being collected, and what needs to happen next. Because if everybody's going out collecting data, you may be doing duplicative things. And so it's very, very key for data to be shared and integrated so that everyone can see what's going on and no one is going out collecting the same data and utilizing those dollars wisely.
And you had to bring fisheries together with government.
Yes.
We won't go into the friction of that one.
Right.
As well as private sectors. So how did you build that trust, being the regulator?
So being a regulator, we knew from a lot of lessons learned here in the Atlantic that that was the first stakeholder group that we needed to reach out to. Because we know how people fish in the Gulf, we know where they fish and how they want to fish. And we knew one of the main concerns was when there's oil and gas rigs are out there, they tie up to the actual rig itself and they actually fish off the rig. So that was our first question. Can we fish off these things? Basically, that was it. Can we fish off these things? Or are we going to be excluded from the area? Once we told them that Coast Guard and others didn't have any rules or regulations, BOEM did not have any rules or regulations that they could not fish once the farm was constructed, they were happy. They were happy with that. But they also wanted us to know where they fished. Not only historical data, but they also wanted us to look at current trends, because that's key. Like where are they fishing? Where is it trending up? Because you don't want to include those areas if those are areas that they're currently using. And so it's not only looking at historical data, but it's also looking at the current data as well.
Okay, thanks. Jake?
Yeah, if you look across New England, I mean, we have a few areas where you kind of have a convergence of ocean uses. Some busy areas like Long Island Sound, for example. I thought Congressman Amo did a great job of kind of laying out the very complex and evolving set of uses in Rhode Island and its adjacent waters, certainly Boston Harbor and Mass Bay. But I actually look a little further up the coast to the central coast of Maine, the Penobscot Bay area. There's the energy security of that region really relies upon tanker ships. They move big tankers in there, kind of up through the complex network of islands and bays and inlets and fjords to places like Bucksport and Searsport. But that kind of industrial shipping, kind of commingles with a cruise ship industry, with a lot of ecotourism, whale watching, and charter fishing and recreation. So, and then of course Congresswoman Pingree spoke to this yesterday. That's the epicenter of the lobster fishery, one of the largest and most valuable fisheries in the nation, and that's where the majority of catch is concentrated. So that's an area where you have a really complex coastline, complex oceanography, and a lot of we've got kind of different uses that are trying to coexist. And I think that's all helped by the network of oceanographic and weather stations we have in the area. I think that really enables vessel traffic and also some of the policy decisions to be better informed. And that's an area where we also, most of the observing infrastructure in the U.S. relies primarily on federal funding, not exclusively though, and that's an area where we do actually have private sector contributors from some of those different industries all helping to support those systems. So to me, that's a really clear signal that that information network, that observing network, does help those different industries to coexist and really to prosper in a way that that I think generally works. The ocean's always changing, the uses are always changing, but we see relatively few conflicts in that area. I hope I didn't jinx things, but it sometimes amazes me, given just the size of tanker ships, cruise ships, the number of lobster vessels that are all moving in and out of those same ports, and yet they manage to make it all work.
I don't think maybe we spend enough time analyzing why it works. And so I appreciate, when you start to add layers of complexity, but it's working, what is making it work, right? Versus assuming it's not working. The other thread I want to pick up on that you mentioned too, Jake, is that there's data provided. That data is being utilized by all these parties, and many of those parties are contributing back to the data system. So it really is a two-way system, right. And that IUSE plays that bridge to be able to create that two-way interchange. Appreciate that. David, would you like to add?
Yeah, I think to build on Jake's remarks, there are good positive examples of this sharing of data and co-investment, actually, in terms of ocean observing, right? I mentioned that the private sector is involved in the mapping of the seabed and the observing of the ocean and the support of these development projects offshore. And traditionally, those data haven't necessarily been shared, but there are instances where maybe an existing private investment has been leveraged by federal dollars to either extend an observation period to make the data available to the public sector into the ocean observing system for an extended period of time. Or possibly another example would be with kind of a deep ocean observing system that was required for an ongoing infrastructure monitoring to bring some federal investment, I think in that case from national academies as well as the Gulf Coast observing system to further instrument and add additional sensors onto that initial plan to be able to provide even additional data into the system, right? So in both examples, there was good collaboration between the public sector and their plans and the public sector needs, as well as what the private sector was already planning to do to be able to expand and bring more value to the public good, right?
Yep. I love the concept of leveraging assets, and I speak from a Shell perspective. Shell and Fugro and the national academies have worked on a number of opportunities in the Gulf of Mexico, specifically because we were lacking deep observations, and observations all the way out to the EEZ, and that ranged from habitats, oceanography, species, and the leveraging of assets can be a real cost savings. Mm-hmm. Michael, you bring a really unique perspective from the maritime side. Are there other critical elements that you need from government besides the financing certainty to bring national maritime leadership to the forefront?
Yeah, I guess that's a big question. So yeah, I mean, of course, there's a number of things that we could touch upon here. I mean, we enjoy today a very close, successful working relationship with the U.S. Coast Guard. Over the years, we've been able to collaborate with them to amend regulations that had previously limited the use or the roles and services that offshore vessels can undertake. So we've been able to continue that relationship, and that is vitally important as we continue to advance what vessels do offshore and the services that they support. We were just talking about data sharing and collection and dissemination. From our perspective, and again, taking a very narrow view, and the previous panel had touched upon, how Starlink has revolutionized remote regions and areas, specifically for us in areas offshore, where communication is now enhanced, and you can share a lot of information, with the beach instantaneously, and that is fantastic. But we should be looking at how data can be shared for cybersecurity and protection in that regards. That's a huge thing. And classification societies are looking at that, and we're looking at that from the private sector. You need to be able to control and secure your vessel, because you never know at what point your service now becomes an issue, and that could be an issue for health and safety as well as the mariners on board. Then going back to, and again, I'm going to come on from a financial perspective as well, things like tax credits and other financial incentives that is provided to our industry. And we're looking at today a huge opportunity for building alternative vessels that aren't traditionally built in the US or haven't been so prevalently built in the United States that now we're looking at building again, which I think is a fantastic opportunity for multifacets of US supply chain and the ingenuity that has been there for decades and decades. The incentives that are required to underwrite successful investment there are going to have to be driven by the federal government through many different ways, and I guess a lot of them are publicly sort of viewed in some of the recent legislation that's being debated. But I think you need to have that, leveling of the playing field with other areas now to bring our shipbuilding capacities back to where they need to be and where our administration wants them to be. And I think that's an amazing opportunity. It's one that we and many other organizations in the United States are chasing today.
So you talked about the financial security and reinvigorating the industry, and both yourself and David operate quite a few boats in your companies, large boats. Those need people. They need talent. They need a workforce. So let's pivot to workforce and community to support your sectors. Michael, starting with you, can you share reflections on the importance of the policy providing certainty to build and support the workforce? And what workforce trends, skills, experience, or otherwise are you seeing emerge as the technologies for the ships are advancing?
So, unfortunately, the industry that we work in down in the Gulf of America, it's very cyclical. So we do have issues where at any point in the upward trend of a cycle, we are chasing for workforce development, employment, and it provides us amazing opportunities to do in-house training. And at Edison West, we do all of our in-house training. All of our mariners are long-term employees of our company. We don't agent them out or in. We provide the opportunities for them to increase their training and to go up the ranks so that their career can be enhanced over their 40 years that they spend with us, ideally. Workforce development, obviously, we need the support of the fantastic maritime academies that we have in the United States. They need continued funding. They need to keep attracting younger minds. I guess a lot of people have an old-fashioned perspective of working offshore, which is not the case today. A lot of the vessels that are being built, not just by us, by F1 around the world today, are almost akin to cruise ships. The amenities on board are absolutely beautiful. So, that opportunity to have a fulfilling life with very advanced communications, keeping you, connected to your families and your friends and your loved ones is there. It's there today. And then vocational training, and again, this goes back to my first point about the cyclicality of our market, which is always, a difficult thing, but vocational training and support so that people can start looking at different areas where there is upcoming demand, and that they can retrain and reskill themselves and have a long career in a certain sector. And you need the stability that I was mentioning at the very beginning. It wasn't too long ago, just over a year, that there was a huge opportunity to retrain people in the Northeast to service wind turbines. And that may not be as relevant or prevalent today as it was just a year ago. But then there's also opportunities in the Gulf of America in the traditional sector of oil and gas, and there's a wealth of opportunities that you can retrain into. And then looking at the advancement and the technological improvement sector, automation is rich full of upcoming and impending employment. So we can automate vessels, we can automate services, we can do more from the beach over the horizon that I think some of my panelists will be able to speak about a little more than I can today. But we can undertake things that were traditionally only able to be performed on vessels now today from the comfort of an office on the beach, and that allows for people to have a much more traditional working life and social balance, so that they can see their families in the evenings and in the mornings and go to the gym and go to Starbucks for their lattes and things like that, which traditionally speaking you weren't. You were working 12-hour shifts offshore and you would see your family every 4 weeks. So I think that type of improvement today has opened up our ability to attract young, bright, talented minds, and I would certainly advocate that we continue to do that.
Well, jokingly, I'm glad you clarified that not all industry vessels have Starbucks, because I certainly don't want to set up that perception, but we do have better coffee than most research boats, speaking from experience. But all kidding aside, you make a really good point about the flexibility and the allowance and the work-life balance pieces of this that I don't think many of our public sectors appreciate. Specifically for Shell, we have offshore workers that live in all 50 states, right? And so there's a huge outreach educational connection to oceans, to all of these states through the private sector workforce. So I appreciate you highlighting some of the dimensions of that in your comments. Before I go to David, I just want to remind people to please start thinking of your questions, holding those up, so that we can leave plenty of time to get through Q&A. David, I'll switch to you as well. Working, having a large offshore fleet, but also community to support. What are some of your reflections and on the dimensions of the workforce, the evolution of the workforce that is needed to support Fugro's efforts?
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. It's a really great topic, and actually going to build on some of Michael's comments. So we are certainly seeing in our data sphere, and data is kind of the end goal, but we need platforms, we need ships to be able to go and collect these data. And of course, the rapid technology that we mentioned earlier is driving change in the way that is done. So those kind of main levers are in the area of robotics, automation, remote operations, AI. So yes, we still have conventionally crewed vessels to do a significant portion of our work, but it's quite amazing how much we are now able to do with uncrewed surface vehicles, and even uncrewed surface vehicles that host underwater robots. So the technology is enabling those functions to continue with the operators sitting on the beach, right, as Michael referenced. And even on the conventionally crewed vessels, a significant portion of our crew is now no longer on the vessel, but on a shore-based remote operations center. And if the function on the ship was in front of a computer, there's a very high chance that job is now being done in front of a computer on shore in a remote operations center. That really, frankly, changes so much, right? I mean, it opens up a workforce demographic and demographics quite substantially, and allows a portion of the workforce that never really could consider these jobs or these careers. As an example, kind of medically unfit folks that maybe had a desire but couldn't work offshore for extended periods, handicapped, as well as maybe young parents raising children. So now these jobs can actually be done onshore without that need to go away from home on a ship 12 hours a day, 4 weeks at a time. And I would say kind of the other aspect of this is on the processing side. So the collection is one aspect I just described. On the processing side, with AI and machine learning, cloud computing, the data, using these data links to get data to the cloud quickly, those can be accessed anywhere. And very sophisticated algorithms now applied, that means that significant less labor into some manual intrusive projects and efforts before can be done in a more rapid manner, which allows kind of a higher level of skills in terms of reviewing and quality control and converting the data into information and knowledge, right? So it's just not managing the data, it's actually using the data to then derive insights. So that's kind of changing the type of expertise that we are now hiring as well.
Right. The complexity of data could be a panel its own. You moved into visualization and products, so I'm going to throw a new question at you and Jake. So your users, whether they be your clients or your stakeholders, can you talk about those elements of the visualization and the products and how that's evolving in these complex landscapes that we're operating in the blue economy? What are trends or challenges or opportunities or just some lessons that you'd like to highlight around the products and the visualizations now that data is more accessible, right, on phones and
Yeah, you want me to go
both
first?
of either one? Happy to start with you, David.
Okay, I can, again, I guess, just building on what I just previously said, I think one of the benefits here is that the cloud doesn't just enable our processors and analysts to access the data kind of in near real time as it's collected on the ship from shore. It also allows our clients to be able to access that and see it as well. So this whole process means that we are able to deliver some insights and visualizations and allow clients to access to the data and to see some insights much quicker than previously possible. And they can do that, again, without even being on the ship, from their desk, logging into portals that gives them view of products and deliverables that are being produced in fairly short order as a result of some of these technology developments. And ultimately, that's of great benefit because it doesn't necessarily require a client to be offshore now either, which is attractive. And it allows their stakeholders to be able to access those portals and to get other inputs on things much sooner than previously was possible as well. So there's the ability to not just give the client access, but to give access to a broader group of stakeholders with input, suggestions, concerns. And ultimately, that accelerates project schedules, delivery, and de-risks, I think, the ultimate effort.
Right.
So, yeah.
And I think as you talk about that accessibility too, it also starts to allow a broader range of stakeholders to see what's happening. This has been particularly in the oil and gas space or the offshore wind space. Groups like Fugro, Inspire can make that information much more accessible to communities, and working with IUs to target key stakeholders as well in terms of what's happening. How is the actual system evolving? So I think that transparency is something needed, but it also can benefit many. Jake, do you want to talk about some of the IUS or NIRICUS products and visualizations and how that serves your community?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start off by saying I think this is a really important question because, you know, products, visualizations, I mean, that's where the rubber meets the road. So for all the effort and investment we put into data collection, it's all kind of for naught if users can't get access to that information in ways that are useful to them. It's also a really hard question to answer because in my experience, every user wants something different. And there are those who just want easy access to data. And they want to be able to download data sets and do analyses and create their own graphs and maps and do their own thing. Others who don't want to be bothered with that. I'm one of them who want to go to products where, you know, you can see interesting patterns in maps or graphs or more dynamic visualizations. So there's a lot of different demand out there. And I think the key to me to meeting it all, and one of the biggest bottlenecks we need to break through is on data integration. There's been, you know, I think we're going through this really exciting moment where a combination of new ocean uses, so an expanding portfolio of energy sources, the move from kind of nearshore to offshore aquaculture, MCDR, I mean, there's been a lot of expanding uses in the ocean paired with kind of innovations in sensor technologies, and all of that is creating this rapidly growing pool of data that, in my view, we have a long way to go to developing the cyber infrastructure that really integrates it and makes it fully accessible. And this is not in any way to contest what David said, because I think he's right. In certain areas, for certain data streams, we do have those good pipelines. We do have really good ways for data to be collected, managed, and to get to users in visualizations. But across the entire kind of data ecosystem, I think there's a long way to go. I thought Vicky spoke to this really well in the previous panel. And it was interesting because at that point and a few others in that panel made me stop and sort of remind myself what their topic was, because some of the themes were very similar, and that was one of them. And there's progress being made here, but I think we're always going to be limited in what we can do with, what value we can get out of, kind of how far we can go with all the data we're generating, until we can figure out ways to integrate it, including the quality control and then kind of the accessibility mechanisms in a really streamlined and as centralized a manner as possible. I don't think everything ever will be or should be completely centralized. I think some purposeful redundancy is a good thing in terms of both how data are stored and visualizations. Right. Again, if I talk to if I talk to two different mariners, they'll want to access data in different ways. Some like numbers, some like graphs, some like maps. So I think having different products that appeal to different users is a good thing. I'll just note one other shift I've seen, though, is particularly among commercial fishermen, I'm seeing more and more interest in, there was a time when I think a lot of the services that IUs provided for commercial fishing fleets was just really the fundamental information on sea state and weather that helped them make just those day-to-day safety decisions. That's really important, but I'm hearing more and more fishermen ask questions and start to play around with products that show the ecosystem more. So they're actually asking a lot of questions and wanting to better understand how things are shifting, how things are changing, and what that might mean for their fishing strategies on different time frames. And I think energy development just kind of adds to that interest and that demand and complicates it to a degree.
Well, based on the questions we're receiving, it feels like the panelists planted some questions, but I know that's not the case. So I'm going to jump across a few, and I will certainly come back to a couple of topics. This one is particularly interesting, Michael and David. For workforce development, at least someone, but I'm assuming a few people maybe heard contradictory information between the traditional maritime workforce, the data collectors, the observationalists, and the emergence of AI, and how those two things may intersect, but also how AI may concern people around job security. So while it might be evolving and it's good use, is it threatening more traditional oceanographers, geologists, et cetera, who maybe don't want to reskill, or mariners who don't want to reskill? So what would you say about those who might be worried about entering a field where AI is quickly advancing, but they may not have those skills?
Okay. Yeah, it's a really good point, right? I think, and I can imagine that there is some perceived contradiction there. I think to address that, a lot of these jobs historically were pretty manually intensive in the sense that there was data collected and a lot of effort to human eyes going through that data and to extract kind of that information and knowledge from it. And just the process to do that was really a tough job, and frankly, hard jobs to staff, with the folks that were doing it not particularly interested in doing it for very long. So from our perspective, I think the more that can be done by machines and have our experts focus where their strengths and skills are, which is interpreting that information to produce insights that are of more value to the client. So that's the shift. We don't necessarily see an elimination of jobs, just a shifting of the jobs from a fairly boring, repetitive job to one where we are trying to more quickly deliver quality insights that still requires the output of those AI processes. But at the end of the day, a human will still have to take that and provide some consultancy or some advice around that and what it means to the client's challenge or problems that we're trying to solve. So I'm not sure if that adequately covers it, but we just kind of see a shift in kind of where that focus is spent.
Great. Michael, do you want to add anything from a mariner point of view?
Yeah, I think there's functions on a vessel that can be performed or enhanced by automation, AI, et cetera, and then there's others that will always ultimately require human interaction. So if there was a mechanical or software failure and we could use AI to assess the diagnosis and efficiently expedite what the root cause is, then you can deliver your repair using human interaction offshore much quicker than you would have had to have done prior to this. And you would have had to have taken your vessel offline, much to your client's frustration, go back to the beach, work for a period of time, resolve it, head back out there. You could lose 2 days. Now we could maybe reduce that 48 hours down to 6 hours, 8 hours, something like that. So the efficiency is there, but the same amount of people, human interaction, are still required. In the future, obviously, we need to have regulatory adjustment to allow certain things to occur. Obviously, in Sweden, we have fully automated ferries, using control systems that actually our company builds. But that's not to suggest that our vessels supporting oil and gas activities are going to be fully automated anytime in the near future, because we still require a lot of mariners and hands to provide the functions that AI simply can't do. Back deck activities, engine room work, and various supporting services for the charterers' personnel on board. The bridge and navigation is the one that I think most people are probably having a sort of an expectation or drawing their conclusion on. If we can reduce the amount of hours required by the master or the dynamic position officers on the bridge and reduce the workload and the burden on them, then they will be allowed to perform other duties and have higher efficiency elsewhere in the vessel. You may see a small proportion that can be reduced from a headcount perspective, but it's not a huge amount. So anytime we'll have availability of human resources, the opportunity to build more vessels is on the table. And some of the points that David was making earlier about unmanned surface vessels and autonomous underwater vessels, they are designed inherently to be unmanned anyway, so we wouldn't be losing workforce. We would just be providing more assets offshore that are supported by personnel on the beach. So increased employment. All of those need to be built. Every shipyard will still need to have personnel, even with advanced robotics that we have in some of the yards today. So I don't see this as an industry suffering through terminal employment reduction because of AI and automation. It's actually just going to be much more efficiently enhanced.
Great. Efficiently enhanced. I like that point, and hopefully that gives some comfort to some of the audience members who are maybe at the start of their career. I want to pivot a little bit to a regulatory question for Tashara, and then I do have tribal and indigenous community question for both Jake and Tashara. So first, how can new emerging offshore energy industries or aquaculture, and within those emerging energies, wave, tidal, wind, floating solar, data centers underwater, all of the above, how can those leverage data permitting, know-how, and infrastructure originally intended by for oil and gas?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So currently the University of Houston is working on this problem. It's called ROIS, repurposing for clean energy. So looking at those assets, first, can they be repurposed or do they need to be decommissioned because they're in poor condition? Understanding what that looks like. And understanding what those uses are. Because originally people thought that they were going to be able to clear the platform off of the oil and gas and put a turbine on there, but the engineering is different for for why it was originally set for oil and gas platform versus what a turbine would take. So we know we can't do those things. But the other things that you mentioned can be done. You can look at floating solar. You can also look at data centers. You can substations that will help with the offshore wind process, tying that back to the onshore. So all of these things are being looked at, and what does it cost? Are the companies that hold the lease actually willing to do this because they still have some type of responsibility in the process, or they are willing participants? And so in the Gulf, the way it works is like a lot of times in the shallow water where that would be more cost effective. Smaller, mid-sized companies actually own those assets now because the bigger companies have moved on to deeper waters. But the way that the lease works is that even if that smaller company was to go out of business, that bigger company is still holding the bag. They're still responsible. So it's like you have to get kind of permission up the chain. Is this going to work? Do all of those companies feel comfortable with doing this repurposing? And is it going to make sense for everyone? And so those are the things that you have to think about in the process.
All right, let's switch and talk a little bit about tribal nations and indigenous communities within the blue economy. What opportunities exist, or how have those tribal nations or indigenous communities been involved in the work that Nirakus is doing, or the planning efforts that BOEM goes through? And then David or Michael, if you have any examples of partnerships and workforce with communities, indigenous communities or tribal nations. So I'll start with you, Jake, and then Tashara.
Yeah, this to me has been one of the more exciting developments in our work over the last few years. Is we've built a few now partnerships with indigenous communities across New England, and there's been many facets to that. Some of that has just been, kind of adopting some of the typical technological tools that we deploy in areas of interest and for kind of policy or economic or cultural objectives of theirs. So I think our first partnership was with the Passamaquoddy in far eastern Maine, who had been active in efforts to remove dams and restore the St. Croix, or in their language, the Scudic River, and wanted to better understand how those dam removals were going to affect estuarine fish communities and the overall estuarine ecosystem. So we've supported a few water quality sondes in the lower Scudic to try to understand that. And we're doing similar things with the Penobscot, with the Wampanoag on Cape Cod. But along the way, we've also, and I need to credit the Lenfest Ocean program here, which doesn't exist anymore, but we were one of their final grantees to do a project that was looking at whether and in what way and sort of how we could bring indigenous ecological knowledge into kind of coastal and ocean observing, and ultimately into management. And that was a really, really eye-opening project. I know I learned a lot. I think one of the first things I learned was that, I'd sort of been looking at traditional Western science and indigenous knowledge as being a little too bifurcated. And talking to some of our tribal partners, they were quick to say, we like technology. We want those tools. And when we use them, that becomes indigenous knowledge. So, let's not draw such a clear distinction between the two. And they also said those tools are in many ways necessary because so much indigenous knowledge has been lost. But I think through the project we also learned that, I think, again, one of the more simplistic views I was walking into it was that tribal communities, held as in individuals and as a culture a set of observations and understanding that could be channeled into scientific and management activities. And I think that is true, and the project has shown that, but it's more than that. And it begins earlier than sort of the information gathering, data collection phase, when it's just fundamentally, what questions are we asking? What objectives are we setting? So there were elements of the project where we went in direction. I mean, one example, I live in the seacoast of New Hampshire. If you move further east into Maine, and especially into eastern Maine, Atlantic salmon runs are still hanging on. They're largely managed under the Endangered Species Act, and that's motivating restoration in things like the Penobscot and the Scudic River. You move to the south, and the Fish and Wildlife Service many years ago made an explicit decision to stop salmon restoration in the Connecticut River, which I think was unfortunately the right decision. We sit in a kind of gray area where we're not actively trying to restore salmon, but we haven't officially written them off. And it was really the Abenaki partners in the project that said, what are we doing with salmon? This, if you look around the seacoast, you see place names that are rooted in the history of salmon runs here. These were important resources for our culture, and are we done with them? Are we trying to bring them back? So we started taking long-running ocean observing data and kind of interpreting those through the lens of environmental tolerances and preferences of salmon to ask the question, is it even possible to bring them back, and what would it take? And it's a question I don't think we would have, and it's been really scientifically an interesting topic to delve into, when I don't think we would have even, it's a box we wouldn't have even opened if we didn't have indigenous partners sort of taking that longer term perspective. And there's a number of other interests, I think, if we get into energy, where indigenous communities, have, again, I think simplistically, many people were concerned with particular sacred sites that may or may not be impacted by energy development. You talk to these communities, you learn that their concerns and their perspective is much, much broader. And they have a sense of stewardship and even a sense of kindred, really, with all of ocean life. They're also interested in their broader kind of cultural history. So off the New England shelf, there was a time that areas that are now submerged were high and dry. And their ancestors were out living and hunting and using those areas. And we don't really have a good sense of what those patterns looked like. So again, those were questions that would never have crossed my mind, just given, I think, the time frame built into my own thinking that has sort of changed when we started working with tribal partners.
Yeah, so that traditional knowledge dimension of how we're looking at these issues. Maybe I'll transition to Shara to maybe put a bit of an environmental consultancy spin on that, as well as the regulator spin. How do you incorporate that knowledge in the work that you've done in the past or currently?
Yeah, so the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management currently for the offshore wind leases has what is called a tribal communications plan in the wind developer's lease. And so they are obligated to make sure that they're reaching out to the tribal community to better understand their needs and their concerns, and to get them to review their project and understand their project. And so creating those relationships. But what I will say, at first, it was a bit overwhelming for a lot of the tribes because so many people were contacting them and having meetings with them. And Big Chief may have met with 5 agencies, because not only were private industry doing it as well, but also federal agencies were reaching out as well. So it was they understood, they came to the table and said, we need help. And we need help reviewing these plans. We need help understanding the process. We may not have everyone that's on staff that can handle this. And so some of the developers did have funds available to help actually review these plans, and so that they can better understand the process and what was happening all around throughout the entire process. So that's one example. The other example is that during Deepwater Horizon, after everything was settled and mitigated through the Restore Act, there were programs that state agencies and federal agencies actually could create in order to get additional funds. Well, the Department of Interior actually created a fund that helped Native Americans to also be trained in various fields. And so that program may still be going on, where they're trained in various science fields, especially in Alabama and along the coast. And so that's 2 examples that I know that BOEM has included the tribal nations in their process.
Great, thank you for those. So we're winding down a little bit, and so I'm going to start to close this out, and then I do have a closing question. So interestingly, I think what I've reflected on from hearing each of you is that there is quite a bit of commonality between concerns, opportunities, beliefs, opinions, between the mandates, financing, data, between private and public sectors. Some of the things we talked about: security, evolution, education, co-investment, certainty, transparency, data. I'm going to star data again, because I think next year at CHOW we certainly need to dive into a data panel. balanced policies that provide broader than 4-year certainty for investment, but also that allows, much in return from workforce support, public-private partnerships. We could go on and on. I will say a dear colleague in the audience swiftly corrected me that I should not think about silos, but think about silos as cylinders of excellence. And I won't call him out, but I'll give anybody $5 if they know who wrote that. Or I'll buy your drink tonight. But, so we're gonna leave on a positive note. So maybe think about a silo that you reflected on in your comment and turn that into a cylinder of excellence. Mm-hmm. How could it be an opportunity between the public and private sectors? And everybody's looking at me like this is the hardest question they have to answer on the SAT. But spin it to opportunity. So what's spin a silo from negative to positive?
I guess I'll go first. While I was over the Marine Minerals Program, the program is actually responsible for understanding where sediment mapping, understanding where is the sediment. If there was a coastal emergency, you can't wait then to try to figure out where is the sand. You have to know prior to. And so with limited funds, we start brainstorming on how can we actually make this work? What can we do? And so we were like, well, downstairs, there's the resource evaluation. They have all that oil and gas data. Can we utilize some of that data? And what we found was the few, and Ruth can probably know more than me, because I'm not a geologist, the few seconds of the data that's collected pretty much ends up on the floor. The oil and gas companies don't need that because they're going deeper and looking for those assets, those deeper plays, right? So we were like, okay, can we utilize that data that you're throwing on the floor to find out where our sediment resources are? And the answer is yes. And so we started reaching out. Free World helped us on some aspects. We started reaching out to companies, asking them if they would be willing to share some of that data, because the data is proprietary until like 25 years. After 25 years, it's government, it's public knowledge. And so some of the companies were a little leery, and then when they understood why we were trying to do it, they were willing to, and we were gonna interpret it ourselves because we had the staff to do it. And so they were willing to give us that data. So that was turning something negative because of lack of funds and budget into something positive by utilizing something we already had that was downstairs already in a computer somewhere. So.
I like it. All right, who's next, Jake?
Well, I was going to raise something similar. I think, again, on the previous panel, I think Shep spoke to the bottleneck, I suppose, of proprietary, legitimate often proprietary interests that private sector actors have when they are paying for data collection. And so there's a lot of data out there that's maybe not being put to full use. And here's where I think, kind of greater interagency coordination in the government could help kind of convey the full utility of those data. Maybe even where it's applicable, tie that into regulatory requirements so that those who have those proprietary interests, which are kind of at odds with the potential public benefit, we can start to tip the scales in favor of the public benefit outweighing the proprietary concern. So I think seeing the full public benefit that could be achieved and incentivizing, kind of capitalizing on it through, it doesn't have to be through regulatory mechanisms, it could also be just through cost sharing. This is where public-private partnerships really become a real thing, where investments that are being made by the private sector get matched by those from the public or vice versa. In a way now that whatever those data needs were or requirements that compelled a private sector actor to invest in and collect those data, they're now getting more by that public sector contribution. And the reach of it is extended because we're now looking across a variety of agency responsibilities and kind of objectives. So, and then I'll throw cyber infrastructure in there as well. I think to make that all work, you need the right cyber infrastructure. So if we really kind of incentivize public-private partnerships financially and through interagency collaboration, with investment and maybe with considering how to ease regulatory burdens by having investments in data collection meet a broader array of public needs, that I think has the potential to create, what do we call these, cylinders of excellence? I kind of like that. I'm not giving up on silos yet. They're a real thing, but I'll start throwing around cylinders of excellence.
All right. David, and then I'll go to Michael.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. I think one is the very significant opportunity that has already been mentioned by both Tashara and Jake, is that much of this private sector data that is being collected within offshore lease areas is going to BOEM. It's being used to adjudicate applications for construction and operations, but it is not being shared, even with NOAA, right? So there's a massive opportunity there if we were able to change that policy or regulation that would allow that broader dissemination and broader use of those data that are being collected. And then the other point is the massive opportunity that exists through these public-private partnerships, where most of the infrastructure offshore, whether it's offshore wind turbines or offshore oil and gas platforms or other physical infrastructure, it is being monitored regularly. So there are sensors on it, near it, looking at conditions on the seafloor, in the water column, and that should be a great opportunity to get this into the broader ocean observing system. The data exists, it's not being fully utilized yet, but a massive opportunity if we get some things right. Yeah.
Yep.
And I like your spin of putting it back to a challenge, because you actually stole mine in terms of accessibility. Is data often, the sharing of data often results in many people kind of being very risk adverse and hesitant because they don't know the purpose and the intent of why it's going to be used. If we turn that around and said there's many opportunities between think of every fixed asset in our nation's waters, and we were just getting access to everything that's been seen on those. Think about the biodiversity information that we would get in blue water, surface down to 3,000 meters in some areas. So I like where you're going, David. Michael, you have the last word on this one.
Fantastic. Well, clearly I've demonstrated I'm not a politician, but out of respect to the city I find myself in today, I'm going to respond to your question, Ruth, by intentionally not actually answering it. So, the preceding 20 years in the US, we've seen very flat electrical energy growth. Over the next 20 years, we're going to see a compounded 6x. So we're going to have a huge amount of new power generation required to be installed. And I want to comment about all energy in the United States should be pursued. Maybe there's some exceptions. I don't want to be too political in this response. Maybe we can, trend down coal, for example. We haven't yet found alternative uses, for other derivatives, so oil is still going to be needed. Gas is a fantastic transition fuel to a lower carbon economy, and then we have all of the renewable energy and potential SMR in the nuclear side. So all energy should be pursued, and I think American ingenuity is there behind all of it, every aspect of it. And when we start looking at the offshore energy cycle, the first offshore drilling rig was a Global Santa Fe, I think in 1947 or something like that. We led the world back then. The first offshore wind turbine was installed in 91 in coastal waters off Denmark. But, we have the opportunity in the United States to deliver manufacturing-based led, services-based led support. The opportunities are huge. And so I would definitely strongly advocate that we pursue all energy, given power consumption is going to be pretty sizable over the next 2 generations.
All right. Well, that's a perfect way to cap an ocean energy leadership panel. So please join me. I hope you heard some compelling thoughts, views, examples today across the range of the public and private sectors that are represented here, but also some really awesome, now I'm getting cylinders. My head was going to silos. Cylinders of excellence that could be achieved if we could maybe get off of selecting one thing over another or picking one use as a favor over another, and instead look at all of these as opportunities for excellence in the ocean space, then maybe we would make some long-term progress. And from there, I hope you will come up and engage with the panel afterwards and throughout the evening, and thank you again for your time today.
Thank you so much. That was fascinating, and I really appreciated that each of you could build on each other's answers and really provide a tremendous amount of perspective. I think one of the things that is really obvious here is this call to action for collaboration, right, across these different aspects of this sector. So thank you again for a fabulous panel. Please, let's give them another round of hand. Thank you. We're going to take a quick picture, and then we're going to get started with our closing keynote. So we'll take Okay, we are, as they say in the bottom of the ninth, we are in the home stretch here. We are delighted to close CHOW with a strong vision, a vision of not just what's possible, but what is next. Since CHOW's inception 25 years ago, we have explored the urgent need for bold leadership, inclusive innovation, and a deeper investment in the ocean enterprise. Over the last few days, you've heard how data technology and community partnerships are coming together to transform action in the oceans, whether it's conservation or exploration, creating a clean energy path, or strengthening coastal economies. But our final keynote speaker invites us to imagine something even more profound. A future where humanity doesn't just study the ocean to protect it, we live in it. Sean Wolpert is the president of DEEP, a company that's redefining what it means to explore and understand and, yes, inhabit the ocean. With a background in global finance and a passion for the sea, Sean leads DEEP's mission to establish a permanent human presence underwater through modular habitats like the Sentinel system. These habitats will allow scientists and engineers, explorers to live and work and do all of this right beneath the waves for extended periods of time, unlocking new frontiers in ocean research, climate research, biomedical technologies, and more. As Sean has said, we are not going deep for our generation. Deep is being built and grown, and it's evolving and innovating for future generations. So by creating platforms that enable continuous ocean presence, DEEP is not only advancing scientific discovery, but also advancing and inspiring a whole new era of ocean stewardship and sustainable development. It's about transforming the ocean from a place we visit to a place we call home. Please join me in welcoming Sean Wolpert.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Sean Wolpert. I'm the president of DEEP. Joel and the team here at NMSF, thank you very much for trusting me to deliver the closing keynote speech this evening, and for all of you trusting me, or at least giving me the first 5 minutes of your time here today rather than going to the happy hour a little bit early. As I mentioned, I'm the president of DEEP. We are on a mission to make humans aquatic, whether you like to get wet or not get wet. Now, probably wondering, why do you want to go down that pathway? Well, we look at a lack of permanence. We look at a lack of engagement, the relative lack of awareness in, the awareness of, in understanding of the ocean. Now, we think the underlying kind of reason for that might be because we lack that permanent presence in the sea. That Jane Goodall effect, the effect of the International Space Station, where you had a human orbiting the Earth permanently since November of 2000. Also, there's the prevailing zeitgeist. When we look at what's occupying everyone's minds today, we are captivated by leaving this planet. We are going to Mars and beyond. We're going to become multi-planetary species. We've seen unimaginable sums go towards that endeavor. We've seen some of our brightest minds and their brain cells go to that endeavor. What I'm going to tell you now is that we will live on our own seabed before we set a single foot on Mars. And that's not just because we can. It's because we must. Because the nation or the group of people that do that will define the next century when it comes to science, when it comes to security, and if I can humbly say, I think society and civilization at large. Now, while we're sat there debating which planet we're going to explore next, there is a rival superpower on this planet that is laying claim to the most strategic domain here on the planet, scientifically, from a security perspective, and environmentally. China has now made subsea in the ocean a national priority, not just in one ministry, but in many ministries. We've seen increased action across the board. What we have is a space race, not an outer space race. What we have is an inner space race. What we need to do as a nation, as a group that cares so deeply about the ocean, is forget about Occupy Mars. What we need to start talking about is Occupy Mare. Now, everyone in this room gets that. They understand the importance of the ocean and why we need to do that. But most outside of this room, they just see the ocean as a big, great mystery. It's this area that's out of sight and out of mind. It's something that feeds us, yes. It's something that moves our goods. It shapes our weather. But when we look at that, it's still something that is, you just traverse it. It's not something we truly need to understand. And I like to look at the spectrum of understanding. We can see way out into deep space and have good understanding of that. This is Pluto. I don't know if it's a planet anymore, but we can see very far out and beyond that. We can come and see deep space and near space. So again, our understanding, how that's then influenced careers, investment, and so forth. Again, high degree of understanding there. We can go from there and all the satellites that have come through, and we continue to move closer still. Our dominance of airspace is high. We come down to land, again, high still, and we can see down to the surface of the ocean. My colleague Dawn Carnegas was on a panel yesterday, and we're learning that even from satellites, we're now able to penetrate visibility below 1 meter of the ocean. So again, innovation continues to push. But as we go down, we get down to the depths below the surface of the ocean, and that's the blind spot. What are my favorite questions to get, and I know it's always a bit tongue-in-cheek, is everyone asks, Deep, are you a Bond villain? They always wonder, why do we want to go down into that shadow realm? That's where a lot of uncertainty sits. That's where a lot of opportunity sits for individuals, groups, or nations that want to influence particular outcomes. Now, when we kind of look at this more broadly, it's something where we look at that lack of awareness means we know very little about the ocean. We've seen some numbers that we're going through, in particular in terms of the number of the percentage of the seabed that's been mapped. It's less than 30 if we listen to the congressman. We know it's more than 5, but it's very little. We know that we've only discovered about 20% of the species or organisms that we believe to live in the ocean. Now, if you are a CEO and you are going to speak to your board and you only know 25% of your market, good luck in that meeting. If you are a general and you are in charge of defending a battlefield and you are blind to 80% of that field, good luck going into the Oval Office and having that conversation. The ocean is critical. It is a critical part of all of our ecosystems and things that we take for granted here on Earth. It provides a large majority of the oxygen that we breathe, more than all of the land-based ecosystems combined. It absorbs a majority of our heat. It absorbs more carbon than all the forests on this planet. And again, we sit there and we look at it and we understand, we say, okay, this is a wild domain. This is something that is resistant. It humbles every single diver that goes into it. It humbles every single engineer that tries to put a machine in it. It humbles every single nation that tries to enter it and influence it and control it. At DEEP, we are looking to change that. We're looking to enter into the ocean in a very sustainable and symbiotic fashion. Now, while we're sat here, looking at the ocean in this blind spot, we still come back up and think about the stars. So we look at what's going on. ISS, International Space Station, is coming out of orbit by 2030. We've seen the private sector once again come rushing to the rescue, looking to replace that. But very soon, we're going to see humans no longer have that permanent presence orbiting the Earth. We know that China is filling that role. They will have control of that domain. But whilst we're doing that, whilst that hand is up in the air here, we are recognizing that beneath the waves, beneath the surface of the ocean, China is racing to put itself at the center of that debate. They are routinely doing 300-meter saturation dives. We know that they have just simulated a 500-meter dive, expanding their capability set in terms of how individuals are able to go down there and either drive science in the depth, or look at things from a security perspective, or look at things from an environmental perspective as well. They have cable cutters. They've just announced they have a cable cutter that can go down and cut cables 2,000 meters, which means they have cable cutters that could go down and cut wires at 6,000 meters. The importance of these subsea cables cannot be underestimated. There is no cloud. Most of the data transmission that's going through goes through subsea cables. $10 trillion of financial transactions go through subsea cables every day. And again, they are vulnerable. What we're looking to do is drive an influence, drive a counter to that. What we need to do is have a presence. You have deterrence is driven by presence. Presence is driven by infrastructure. Infrastructure is driven by intent. This move here, China, again, has made this a national priority. They've made it a national priority from a science perspective. They've made it a national priority from an environmental perspective, and importantly, from a national security perspective as well. President Xi has come out and through that declaration says he would like a Great Wall in the South China Sea. It's an extension into that domain. What they're doing is they're taking their spotlight and shining it in that dark area. They're having control, marine domain awareness through distributed marine operations. This will give them that leg up to better understand and gain that knowledge of this critical ecosystem, of the criticality of the organisms and the science that's contained within it. And again, this is something that they've already started to do. We need to come together and act now. They are the road. They view themselves as the leader. This was where America was on pole position. And now this is an opportunity for them to kind of step in, but all hope is not lost. We still do have leaders in this room. We have leaders throughout the administration that recognize that this is an important opportunity for us to take that next step, to drive that influence, not for the next decade, not for the next 2 decades, but for the next century. This is not just about defense. This is also about science. It's about influencing policies, making sure that we're directing the right investment in the right areas to bring this home. Now, the one thing we lack is a permanent presence. Everything we access now is discrete. It's temporary. And that leads and drives a lot of this lack of understanding. this yearning to go and fill and not sit up here and say we've only mapped 20% of the seabed. We want to say that we've mapped 100% of our seabed. Now, we've heard some of the earlier panelists and those on these different sessions have highlighted, and this was an interesting fact for me to even learn. When we look at the continental US and we look at our land-based ecosystems, but then we expand that out to the exclusive economic zones, more than half of our sovereign territory is beneath the surface. Again, highlighting the criticality and the importance for us to go and really capture the understanding of that ecosystem. Now, how we're going to go and drive that, we assume that it's stable. We assume that it's distant, that it can't touch us. There was a time when we assumed that the ocean was too big to fail. We now hear people talking about that it's too big to save. That's wrong. As the great philosopher Jack Reacher told us, assumptions kill. We can't make that assumption. We cannot make that mistake. So what we're doing at DEEP is we want to drive that permanence. Our goal is to make humans aquatic. It's to bring humans and allow them to go and live on the seabed for extended periods of time. What we're driving, and if I'm allowed to invent a word, is optionality. I think we're allowed to invent words in this town. Optionality. We want to make sure that humans could go down there, and they could be in one atmosphere, so breathing the same air we have here, or be in an ambient type of environment, which gives them fluid access out to go and work in that area. For the scientists out there, what we are doing is we're consolidating the scientific chain into a single subsea campus. No more bounce diving, no more working with clunky ROVs. This is you going down into that realm, into that area, diving for hours at depths of up to 200 meters, working with the local ecosystems, testing your equipment, running experiments, and then coming back onto the habitat and having access to your labs, having connectivity to your colleagues who are jealous back up in the bricks and mortar classrooms. Again, knowledge gain, exploration, pushing the boundaries. We've heard the panelists and other speakers mention the possibilities from a pharmaceutical perspective, how it's going to help us gain better insights with respect to climate change. For those that might have a militaristic kind of element to it, all back office, but this is something that gives you observation. It is deterrence. You start to drive greater understanding of that sovereign territory subsea. If any of you have internet meshes in your homes, think of it that way. We are creating a mesh there subsea. Now, how do we do that? This is Sentinel. We do have very fancy creative directors, but this is going in the water this year and next year. This is happening. Again, the future is here. What you see here is something that's large. It's redeployable. It's modular. What this is doing is creating that proper subsea residency. What you're able to do is take these and stitch them together. You're able to create functional sections there on the seabed for extended periods of time. And what we're thinking here is not just about the system. We have to think about Edison. It wasn't just about the light bulb. It was about the system design. We've seen so many different technology today. I think it was cylinders of excellence was used, so I will now substitute that in with silos. It's about coherence across the system. It's how the AUVs do not have to go to the surface for maintenance, to recharge, to transmit data, both upload and download. It's able to go and monitor subsea cables, monitor pipelines, communicate back anything that's going through that section of the ocean. Again, very powerful, and what we're doing is no longer will anyone ask, am I a Bond villain? No, I'm shining a giant light. We are shining a giant light on the ocean. And what that's going to do is that's going to drive change. It will not only be a deterrence, but what it's going to do is it's going to inspire the next generation to pursue those careers in the ocean. Whether you're a marine biologist, whether you're a marine engineer, whether you want to understand the human physiology when you are in an extreme environment, what we're trying to do is create that flywheel where no longer there's this unreasonable gap between the awareness in or the awareness of the ocean. We want to take the minority view and get over that tipping point. We believe this is the way to do it. Intelligently, of course. I'm not arguing that we're going to go and litter the seabed with these. I'm suggesting something on a considerably smaller scale. So go back to this map, and we're thinking about these critical areas where if we were to put our brightest scientists down there to work, to go and dive, and we let them have 5 years of unfettered access down there, what would we learn? Same way as Jane Goodall learned about primates so many years ago. You can't have a discrete presence. The ocean is wild. This is the most complex, critical ecosystem on Earth. We need to treat it as such. We need to do so intelligently, but we need to do so in a way where we can go down and have genuine, true knowledge gain. So we start to create these clusters. We can go through and have science be there at the backbone, but it also helps to shine that light for us in this critical era, this critical movement as we move forward. And we can expand this out. And we can look up into the Alaskan areas. We can look out into the Pacific. If you look at all of these and you're saying, oh man, that's probably really, really expensive. It is a fraction of the cost of what it took to design, build, and assemble the International Space Station. A fraction. I'm not going to tell you what the number is, but it's a fraction, and a fraction of a fraction. And again, what is this going to drive? This is going to drive that next phase of American exploration. Now, we have so much here. I'm American. My wife says I have a tortured Madonna accent, but I've lived in London for 15 years. And the one thing that I have recognized is that being on the outside and looking in, it's not as messy as you might feel like it is here, but we are exceptional in so many areas. The one thing that I recognize and I'm very proud to see is that we do have a genuine culture of innovation. We have all the right ingredients to deliver exceptional innovation, exceptional change here in this critical area. We do have economic strength. We do. We've got world-class universities. I know that's in flux a little bit now, but we still do. Again, have hope. I like to see through these areas. Culture of entrepreneurialism. We are a leader in engineering, a leader in technology. There's a reason why. Don't listen to the noise. If you look at the signal and how people act, people still come to the US to innovate, to build their businesses, to see their ideas come to fruition. But the challenge is, and this panelist mentioned earlier, these are the cylinders of excellence. We need to drive the coherence across the board. We need to take a step back and think about the incentives of how we drive that coherence across the system design. We see our habitats as but a component in that system design. There are key innovations that we are looking for in communication subsea, in power generation subsea, how we're able to bring this together and do so in a way that allows us to truly command and engage symbiotically beneath the surface of the ocean. This is not just about expenditure. I think that's the wrong way to think about this. We often think about, oh, this costs money. This isn't filling up your car, right? This is investment. And I think that's the right way to think about this. 10 years, the first 10 years of the Apollo program, the GAO did a study. The return on that investment was 15 times, 15x on that initial investment. What that did from technological advancements, what that did for new industries, how that brought more capital to the United States. That's how we need to think about this. If we just start thinking about this as something you put on your credit card, you've already lost. We need to think about this as building a stronger foundation and stronger pillars for the future. What we learn here is not only going to be applicable about how we go and engage with the ocean, and I'm going to argue against myself a little bit here, This is also going to make us better at going to space, about thriving in space. If we do ever want to genuinely become a multiplanetary species, we are going to go through the ocean first before we go and do that. So again, this work, as we continue to push on robotics, in terms of AI, in terms of engineering, subsea operation, this is all an investment. This is going to make us stronger. This is going to build the foundations for us to go in that next era. Now, what we're looking here, at DEEP, we have seen this firsthand. On the, I think in my, top right, this is DEEP Manufacturing Limited. It's our large form additive manufacturing capability sets. We have, those are 3.5 meter tall robots, and we have 6 of them that will work to print, 3D print, those habitats. This is that next generation in manufacturing, and it would not have come to fruition at DEEP, and we are one of the leaders in this, if it were not for our endeavors and our push to go and drive subsea habitation with our Sentinel program. You look at what this is going to do as well in terms of helping to advance our preparedness from a security perspective. It's going to drive greater degrees of research and development. What it means is that this is something that's going to continue to create jobs. It's going to create opportunities for those of you who are young and looking at and exploring careers in the ocean, in extreme environments, whether you want to be a scientist or an engineer. Gotcha. So, here's what we need. And this is going to echo a lot of the feedback that we've been hearing so far. We need a coherent national subsea strategy that spans the functional departments. It's not science versus defense, environmental versus defense. We need to find the coherence across the board. We've seen different breakout groups where we've seen defense and science work together. They have done so for decades. They might not be doing it in a very visible way at times, but they're very much symbiotic. That's what led to the space program. We've seen so many different naval divers that go and support these scientific programs. It's thinking about them in symbiosis of how they can support one another and drive value, cross-sharing of those resources. The policy reform. There's been a big emphasis on the private and public sector collaboration. We are a private sector company. We are a private sector company that is funded to be operating generationally. We are not here for 5 years. We are not here for 10 years. We are going to be here for a very long time to make sure that we're able to deliver on this opportunity. But it's making sure that we're able to allow the brilliant brain cells to operate, reducing that red tape, and not having analysis paralysis, as I heard be rehashed earlier today. What we want to do is drive progress. We want to drive excitement and innovation. And we need the political will. We need the political will to step up and deliver on this. Recognize the gaps, recognize the opportunity, and doing nothing is a decision. We cannot stand for that. We need to step up and make sure if we are going to shape that next century, that we do so together. So, before I get yanked off, it is time to occupy Mare. We're going to drop the Occupy Mars stuff. We are going to engage intelligently with the ocean. The depths are calling. The question is, who is going to answer? Echoing the comments from the Honorable Congressman last night, talking about generations, I think what we all seek to do is to be good ancestors. That's what we aim to do. We want to leave greater degrees of knowledge, and we want to leave the ocean and the planet in a better place. I personally believe that if we do want to be good ancestors, that it must be America to pick up that blue phone. Thank you very much. I am very grateful for your time.
Wow. Well, I hope you are blown away and inspired by an unbelievable vision, a vision of what is possible and what is next for humanity. And this has been a great example Thank you, Sean Wolpert, for closing us out, telling us the story of DEEP. There are so many exciting undersea habitat projects that are underway that offer a compelling opportunity for us to really think about what is possible, to imagine our work producing unbelievable observations, insights, and ultimately benefits for the oceans, for people, for humanity. So thank you again. Clearly, our future is in the oceans. And I really appreciated his comment that our job is to be good ancestors. I think you heard over the last 2 days here at Capitol Hill Ocean Week, many of us are talking about our projects, our science, our conservation, our community building, the technologies we work on, the regulations we're trying to strengthen. And really, it is clearly being done with an eye towards leaving a legacy for the next generation. It is really about the work that we do together today as a community of ocean stewards that is going to leave a lasting legacy. So it has been a few remarkable days together. Thank you for joining us online and here in person in Washington, D.C. at Capitol Hill Ocean Week. Thank you for spending time with our sponsors and also at the exhibition booths in the hall. Thank you for visiting the Sanctuary Cinema. I know a lot of you all enjoyed that. We're looking forward to bringing that back next year. And I want to also thank many of our distinguished guests, our panelists, members of the administration, members of Congress and their staff who were so grateful in their time to join us here at CHOW. I also want to thank our event organizers. Clearly, we are gathering at a very urgent time, right? We have come together during a period where the executive orders of the new administration offer hurdles, and as you heard today, they offer challenges, and as you heard, they offer opportunity. It's up to us. It is up to us how to translate that into action. So I believe this group, this community has resolve. It has ingenuity. We're going to do it. We're going to find a way forward. And I hope you leave this CHOW inspired by the many stories, the many strategies, the many examples. I hope you leave CHOW strengthened by the connections of our community, that you came together and you shared your strategies, your hopes, your ambitions, how you're going to move forward right now. And we've also seen how the ocean enterprise has come to life. And I feel there's a lesson for all of us. We may, as Dr. Perry put it, work sometimes in silos, but when we connect, we are stronger together. When we understand we need academia, we need federal support, we need state engagements, we need to respect sovereign groups like tribal nations, and we also need to bring the private sector into our engagement in order to be those incredible stewards. And we've heard how real progress, of course, yes, can be platformed by technologies, by data. I think you heard that there was a lot of need, a tremendous need, to start to weave that data together to pursue more opportunities. How are we going to unleash anything if we cannot map the ocean? And yes, we heard from scientists and technologies, visionaries, and community leaders, and they showed us that it requires participation and public and community input from the ocean's users, from all of us, from everyone, to truly steward these incredible places. So we are at an urgent point of inflection, and there's a call to action that I would share with all of you. Let us follow the science, yes, let's do that, but let's also believe in people. Let's believe in one another. Let us also invest in every link of the ocean enterprise. Let's build a future that balances prosperity with protection and development with opportunity. Because protecting our ocean is about more than exploration. It is really about hope. Hope for a better world and a balanced relationship with the ocean and its resources. Thank you to our NOAA colleagues, our sponsors, our advisory committee, our speakers. I would love to thank our Board of Trustees who participated in every part of the planning and also up on stage here at CHOW. Thank you so much. Thank you also to the staff of the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation. I know many of you were able to interact with those folks out there. Thank you all for engaging with them. Thank you to our attendees and our viewers online. We really appreciate you hanging in there with us and participating also in those virtual sessions. A special thank you goes out to my executive staff, Shannon Colbert, Jason D'Onofrio, Allison Alexander, and Veronica Ali. And I also want to give a big round of applause to Diana Garcia, our CHOW manager. Congratulations again to our Leadership Award honorees, Representative Huffman and Representative Whitman. Thank you again also, Senator Whitehouse, for appearing at the Ocean Awards. Let me close with this. There is no greater inspiration for our work than the waters that sustain us. Let's keep building on this momentum of this CHOW, carry it forward into this next chapter when we gathered again next year on the 250th anniversary of this country. Thank you all, and we'll see you again at Capitol Hill Ocean Week, June 2nd through the 4th, 2026. Good afternoon, and thank you again.